So I think Lahore has produced some of the best founders and companies in Pakistan, not just in my portfolio, if you look in general. And there's a reason for that. If you look at the three big cities, Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad, the only one with ancient roots is Lahore. So there's actually people that live there that have actually lived for a long time in Lahore. So I think, history does play a huge important part, because wherever you stay for a long time, you develop roots, and then opens up your mind in other forms of intelligence. I'm Faisal Aftab. I'm the founder and CEO of Zayn Venture Capital. It's the premier fund in Pakistan. We have more than almost 10 companies that are leads in their particular categories, and we've had the first exit in Pakistan as well to a large tech company. So I'll actually even go earlier than the origins of, let's say, we always focus on academics and the work environment. I think what shapes a brain and some of the smartest entrepreneurs is really the early years. And वो मेरे जो formidable years थे, I spent that in Berkeley, California, जो Silicon Valley जहाँ पे based है. So, getting exposure as a young child, I mean, they had in as early as second and third grade, they would introduce computer programming. And again, keep in mind, this is the 80s, so it's the very early nascent stage. And growing up in that environment, I think there's something in the water there. It creates a buzz in your brain where you start to always get inspired by entrepreneurship. And this is the same time when companies like Apple and Sun Microsystems and Adobe and Oracle and multiple others were coming up. And so having that impact was, I think, in the back of my mind, I always felt technology was the future. Then, we moved back to Pakistan. I spent a couple of years here, and then I went back to college. The reason why I mentioned that is that had I not spent those couple of years in Pakistan, I probably wouldn't have come back or not been able to affiliate myself with the culture here to invest. And when I say culture, I'm talking about those are business habits, receivable cycles. Aging is much longer here than other parts of the world, and that's cash flow is very critical for business. So I did accounting, economics, and 5 years honors program, which was with a master's in management information systems, MIS. From there, I went into Deloitte Consulting in New York. I had some of the biggest clients from BlackRock, JP Morgan, Blackstone, a company called Bear Stearns, which doesn't exist, but it was part of the 2008 financial crisis. Got exposure to the entire financial structure and infrastructure, which was the settlement layer. When I say settlement layer, ICE, which is the back end of the New York Stock Exchange, and companies like BankServe and BankLink, these were the infrastructure early layers. And so that gave me a very profound understanding of the, you can say, the digital side of financial. It was more analog back then, but it was the settlement layer. I think a lot of the events playing out in the world, which to me is part of my thesis, that we're in that stage where World War I and II was about the industrial age and mechanization that was disrupting the agrarian age. So agrarian age would be princely states and feudals and large landholdings, and workers moved into the mechanization state, which was the technology. That resulted in a change of a reserve currency, pound to the dollar, and also change of hands of the British Empire, losing to the American Empire, which became a very dominant empire in terms of the assembly line, and there was an innovation that they created. And by the end of World War II, I believe the US was somewhere about 50% plus of global manufacturing, the global manufacturing base. And you can see parallels for that here. So I'll go back to New York, and I was there during the 2008 financial crisis, and that was, you can say, kind of lifting the veil component of the eyes, where you realize for the first time that everything you knew about finance maybe did not apply the way it was being told, and that was the first discovery. Having studied in the US, I also realized that the academic system lags in telling you certain truthful aspects of that system. And the main one being gold being in the system till 1971 instead of a debt instrument called the US Treasury. It's important because my movement to Pakistan was linked to understanding this scenario, that after 2008 money printing began, and then I started focusing on debasement and hedges against debasement. And suddenly in 2013 and 14, I learned about a new technology, which is now known as blockchain technology. but it suddenly clicked with multiple things, that there was an algorithm that was designed that's behaving as digital gold, and multiple other layers of the financial system are being made at the protocol level. One had to obviously have a bit of a vision or some sort of a thesis. It clicked that, look, the regulation seems to be pushing for cashless systems. The US had introduced and traceability. The US had introduced FATCA, which was accounts of all Americans had to be submitted back to the US by any financial institution in the world, primarily overseas. Then the second one that came along was OECD Common Reporting Standards, which is what is known as where your tax residency is, and then your financial data is sent over to your wherever you spend the most amount of time, usually 183 days or more. And the third element of this was FATF, which was in the garb of the gray economy, the gray movement of money, which was primarily anti-terrorism financing and your narcotics money movement. What was being done gradually was removal of cash from the systems in anticipation that we will enter a massive global debt crisis, which is what we're in today. And the wars that you're seeing are ultimately linked to the underlying reserve currency and pricing of trade. You have to look at the Iran war as well as effectively the repricing of the dollar into the renminbi or some other currency. The 2008 financial crisis allowed me to understand that credit is being expanded to countries as soon as they run out of countries to expand credit to. So, for example, 2000 the Eurozone was brought online. In 2008 they all went bankrupt. Then in 2008 they moved to the BRICS and started expanding credit there. Backing money started flowing there. And then simultaneously at the same time I heard from Goldman Sachs, they coined this word, the next 11. And in that next 11, Pakistan was listed. Large population, undocumented, and primed for credit expansion and cashless systems. Which cashless systems are important because that documents your economy. Whereas cash transactions are undocumented. So if Pakistan's debt to GDP ratio is, let's say, around 70% today of a $400 billion economy, I personally believe we're a $1 trillion economy. So that means that we're not as insolvent as some of the developed markets that are 120% debt to GDP. So the move was based on that, and then understanding the protocol layer at the what I would call Bitcoin, which is just digital gold, and then eventually stable coins and central bank digital currencies. I realized that Pakistan is exactly trailing the path that India had been in previously, where they demonetized their rupee and went aggressively cashless in 2016, and that created massive documentation of their economy, and they became the fifth largest. We were heading in that crux, developed a thesis, and tech is the ultimate documentation. And so, whether it's Foodpanda or BookMe or any of the tech platforms, the transactions, even if settled in cash, get logged. You're usually doing barter or trade, not barter, but like purchasing, and goods and services are being traded. And so, but when you unlock that component, that really creates a big boom. And that's what led me to set up the first fund in Pakistan in partnership with the Laxin Group, which was Pakistan's first institutional VC, locally licensed. And then we went on to make several investments. So Laxin VC was, I would say, very pivotal in terms of my venture capital career because, first of all, getting capital was not easy for Pakistan. And so partnering with Laxin Group and their depth was a huge backer in terms of them having the early faith to kind of enter this space. I was the partner and the managing partner of the fund. We wrote a thesis with my other business partner, Babar Lakhani. And the thesis was actually a lot of what's playing out. It was about Chinese tech, big tech versus American big tech. That's kind of how we saw the world. And then basically everything else was growth by acquisition, where it's like Pac-Man eating up the world and digitizing it, really for access to data. The thesis was eventually what's playing out with AI, that eventually all this data will be used for decision making and as a decision engine in multiple facets of life, very similar to what China has in place in the social scoring system. Again, that was a speculative view, but that was part of what the underlying thesis was when I wrote that thesis. So Pakistan really started scaling in terms of adoption of tech around 2017. Back then when we were doing the number, it was around 40 million active users with smartphones. You need that total addressable market, not just the 250 million, because that's the base through which you're going to connect. And so e-commerce was the primary focus at that time, consumer-focused businesses, because that was the layer that was missing in Pakistan. I believe you always have to have a thesis of the worldview as a venture capitalist, because all you're doing is trying to predict the future, or at least focus enough on the future. And even if you get it 10% right, you'll do better than people that are focusing on a week or a month, right? And you try to when you visualize it. So it was just based on a thesis that it's cashless, and we're going more towards autocratic global systems from what we have seen in the post-World War II order. That's why I mentioned the two wars. So that thesis, basically, a lot of the events that transpired, a lot of the laws that changed, and a lot of the human rights that were taken away during that period, emboldened me more to basically now openly go out and embrace the thesis that I believed in. And so I went out and basically raised a fund on my own. So the first one is the Pakistan-based fund from Pakistan Capital. This fund actually was, and it's the only fund in Pakistan that has this type of capital, was anchored by Abu Dhabi. I can't name the institution just out of confidentiality, but it's the largest institution that's set up there. And they understood the thesis in terms of blockchain and what's happening at a technology level. And, after getting them on board, then we got other institutions from New York and a lot of the large family offices in the MENA and Europe region. They also joined this fund. And so with that, then you basically go out with a thesis and start investing in layers. So one of our thesis was that eventually credit will expand and credit scoring will become automated. So we invested in platforms, a Lahore-based company called Adilfi, which basically has lent out about $100 million to SMEs and individuals using banks' balance sheets with an automated credit decision-making engine, and with net portfolio losses of less than 0.1%. But really, Zayn VC's main thought was this is the exponential adoption of tech. This fund has to be sizable enough. It has to have the pedigree investors that understand the thesis, and an investment committee, by the way, which includes Bo Seal, who ran Paramount Capital, an American guy out of Southeast Asia. And that fund saw the early years of Southeast Asia's adoption of tech and exponential growth. Marvin Lau, who basically created 500 Startups Accelerator Program, he's a partner there, a former partner there, did 500 projects with almost 600 projects that he took in the Accelerator Program, some of them being Solana and iterations like that as well. And then Ashar Siddiqui was the global managing partner of 500 Startups, now known as 500 Global. And he's on the investment committee as well. The reason why I brought these people on the investment committee was to trace the lag effects. They've seen in more developed markets how things played out. And so then we use that combined energy to understand the market. So me and the team were the feet on the ground, and then and obviously part of the investment committee. And then they would give their input as well. So I think these factors really help the fund as well. So it's not just me; it's a collection of thoughts that and decision making that ended up making. I think now, if we look back, we almost have about 9 vertical leads, like in terms of the vertical they're leading the market, and collectively companies have raised now between debt and equity about almost $500 million. There's companies in my portfolio that are moving 4% of the country's GDP. They're logistics fintech companies that have reached across above billions of dollars, right? There's other payments companies that are processing billions of dollars, not just rupees. And most of these guys are profitable or break even. So the lifetime is, even in e-commerce, in the fashion realm, those companies are dollarized because they're exporting, and they've also created a profitable business, right? These are the same founders that are exposed to Silicon Valley, but you don't just follow some other model blindly. You have to apply the local nuances to it, and you can make things succeed. So relying solely on foreign funding, I don't think I don't think any of the big businessmen in Pakistan were always looking for a handout from somebody else, right? You deal with the hand you're dealt with in your particular circumstances, and you continue to fight, and resilience. That's what it's about. But if you build a house of cards, which you do if you just follow Silicon Valley, then obviously you'll see that parabolic up like Bitcoin or crypto. and a come down, right? But the slow and steady wins the race, and you eventually capture market share and become dominant as long as you're consistent in any market, right? So I think that's from my perspective. I think capital will return to Pakistan. It's been delayed. It's not going to be the type of immature VC capital that came in 2021. It will be more growth by acquisition. We just saw our first exit for Cravemart to InDrive. InDrive is a pretty formidable, sizable company. So you're going to have those type of exits. You're going to have other regional growth by acquisition. So let's say Saudi or GCC based platforms. GCC in terms of population is tiny. So they need countries and populations like Egypt and Pakistan to expand those bases, right? If you look at big tech, it's just been expansion, growth by acquisition. So you'll see a lot of those type of exits. We've seen our companies enter the GCC, and some of those companies may become unicorns because they've basically done better than GCC-based companies, right? So there's lots of ways to skin the cat. It's just you have to have imagination, and it's just like any business. There's no cookie cutter, this playbook. You have to adapt, just like when you're playing sports, based on the weather conditions, based on or economic conditions, and you have to be focused and dedicated. So I think Lahore has produced some of the best founders and companies in Pakistan, not just in my portfolio. If you look in general, and there's a reason for that. If you look at the three big cities, Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad, the only one with ancient roots is Lahore. So there's actually people that live there that have actually lived for a long time in Lahore. So I think, history does play a huge important part, because wherever you stay for a long time, you develop roots, and it then opens up your mind in other forms of intelligence. I've backed some of the best founders that came out of Lahore or surrounding Lahore area. Faizan from BookMe being one of them, originally from Sahiwal, moved to Lahore, again for technology reasons and access to larger platforms, and created the number one travel platform in Pakistan. Then another person who came from Sahiwal, incidentally, the same school that we backed, same school as Faizan, is Umar Khan from Postex. And again, I think there's something in the water in that region, like I said about Silicon Valley, where you find those type of founders, right? Arif Iqbal from LAM, again, top-notch founder, and Lahore-based, and the ecosystem in Lahore was leveraged. Collabs, Umar and Ali Shah, again, those are hardcore Lahoris, ancient Lahoris with roots, and they built one of the best co-working spaces, and in fact expanded it to the MENA region as well, GCC. So it's, and then lastly, Adilfi, which I mentioned before, the credit scoring engine. Those guys are from Lahore. And Edufy, which is our educational fintech, Alina Nadeem, she was also a shark on Shark Tank. She's one of my portfolio company founders as well. She's built a great product. It's in education financing. So, the list, I'm just highlighting a few. There's quite a few other, Taza and Abrar and those guys also. But I think, these type of cities, because of the infrastructure, and I have to give a lot of credit to PITB as well, because, creating that infrastructure and then the type of environment, it did create a culture where people were willing to, collaborate and work together. And more recently, you had the Lum Center for Entrepreneurship and the NICAT, which is the Air Force incubation center. So I think these type of things have played a pivotal role, along with the co-working space. I'll also mention Daftar Khan. It's not a portfolio company of mine, but they were one of the early ones that created co-working spaces and collaborative environments. So it's a combination, combined effort. So just building on that example, I would say that the talent is definitely there. There's no shortage of intellect and smart people. And I personally don't think IQ has any correlation with speaking English or going to like an elite school. That's just a rigged mechanism for the corporate white-collar world. That stuff is gone in the future, right? With AI coming in. So if you let people and the best thing with AI also, by the way, is that, if you speak Saraiki and you have a naturally high IQ, Elon Musk was scoring high even in childhood. Right? He came from a very broken home and an impoverished background. So I think that limitation of learning English and certain going to certain schools, that component goes away because now I can speak in Saraiki or Pashto or Hindko, any language, and immediately learn knowledge instantaneously. So audio and that communication gap changes the paradigm, right? So Pakistan will be able to produce lots of talent. There'll be lots of domestic solutions that get created. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because until now we've been importing software from abroad or platforms from abroad to solve solutions. That doesn't go well when the world fractures because all your data is sitting on somebody else's cloud. And now that we've seen that with Palantir and even with OpenAI and I think even Claude, even though they resisted, foreign governments can use that data and information, right? So we have to go domestic and come up with domestic solutions. So in the US, you have like for example, Silicon Valley or Austin, Texas, right? One of the reasons why people in the same sector congregate is because while you're developing different things, you need to collaborate also, right? And then engineers that you may work at Meta or the other one works at Google. But when you meet afterwards, there's exchange of ideas and new companies get formed. And innovation expands in that way, right? Because you see gaps. So these co-working spaces in Pakistan or even like the NICAT and these incubation centers are acting as those microcosms where multiple companies are and tech founders and all sorts of founders are there and they are exchanging ideas and collaborating. And so it's kind of missing, it's kind of almost a campus type feeling where you house companies with similar ambitions and it's amazing when you put people that think outside the box and of different backgrounds in one room, what type of amazing things come out, right? When you're building a startup, it's really a marathon, right? So a lot of the questions that stood out, I mean, usually the key test they passed was conviction, tenacity, that, every time they fall down, they get back up and fight, right? And then also, understanding they had a vision. The vision is very important because if you don't leave the house without driving direction if you're going to a new destination. So vision is where you want the company to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. I think in innovation, you need people to come from all sorts of backgrounds. And I've backed founders that are solving problems that I never even experienced. For example, the travel busing problem. Faisal had experienced it. And so therefore he knew exactly what to build. And so that's an important part. But the key thing is that this is the first time in Pakistan that you're investing in people based on intellectual capital versus collateral or physical asset, right? And I think that's unlocking the potential of Pakistan. So I think the artificial intelligence and AI is probably the most transformative thing that's come for us as a civilization and as humanity, right? Probably like since the invention of the wheel or some of those type of transformative technologies, we haven't seen something like this. So there's a positive and a negative out of this, right? So the positive obviously is that it's going to create productivity at a level that you can't imagine, right? In terms of, let's say, again, coding. If you're a good coder, it's great for you because now you can get the work done as if you had 20 engineers under you at a fraction of the cost. I think it's good in the medium term for mid-level and high-level software engineers, but I think in the long term, even their job security is questionable. Right? You'll always have outliers of really high-end developers and programmers that are innovating and constantly doing. I use the word Kaizen principle, which is a Japanese word. It's called continuous improvement, right? So the era of complacency where I'd work hard and then eventually get in a chair, an office chair, and I'm just sitting relaxed with my perks and fringe benefits. I think that era is gone, including for myself as well. You have to constantly innovate, constantly learn, constantly adapt, because the world that we knew from, let's say, 1945 till 2020 has ended. And so you can't even ask your parents for advice because they lived in a relatively very different world. And so, it's really other qualitative measures that will come into play. And obviously humans will always innovate and continue to, create. But I do think that, it's the first time we've created an intelligence that eventually will be smarter than us. And that component then, it just, what have we done as humanity to less intelligent creatures So that there's two views to this, right? One is that view, and then the other view is obviously utopia. So okay, let's go in that view. That view is that okay, everything is going to become so efficient that the cost of goods and services is going to drop down almost to nothing. Elon Musk and some of those other guys. So I forget the guy's name. There's a book called The Age of Abundance. They subscribe to that thought process, right? I think it's Peter Diamandis it's his book. So the issue there is that okay, if AI is doing everything and the production cost of production goes down and services, it'll cost maybe $10 to buy an iPhone versus 1,000. So then the question comes that what do humans do, right? And I think new things will come up on how we will earn money or what. There's always novelties of what human beings justify, right? I mean, half the time we're creating things as a source of desire. When I say desire, like everybody's obsessed with having a smartphone. I personally don't think smartphones exist in another 7 years, right? The user interface is changing entirely. It's going voice driven. So there'll be opportunities, for people. There'll be, I think, inflation, while we're all scared of it, there's that deflation element that comes in where things actually become cheaper. So blockchain obviously has many use cases. Payments is going to be the most critical one to begin with. And tokenization is going to be a huge element. So I'll give you examples. I mean, I can only cite opportunities because entrepreneurs have to come up with mechanisms of where they would head in this. So obviously there's the whole financial system, everything from securities to any asset class, bonds, everything is going to be tokenized in the future. The structure of society changes with blockchain and AI. अभी तक जो layers आ रही थी आपकी TCP/IP protocol, फिर उसके बाद आपकी voice over IP, video over IP, voice over IP, like all these mobility. I mean, I'll count those layers as in smartphone layer, just because they were layers that allowed us to enter the real world, right? From just the back end. This blockchain is just a protocol layer, right, for settlement and data authentication. And then you've got the AI layer, which is the intelligence layer placed on top of it. So when you take the entire tech stack and analyze it up and down, you'll realize that the whole world is about to turn to a tech stack in terms of all processes, right? And that, to me, that's a huge change. So now coming to our realm, as in today, and projecting 15 years from now or maybe 20 years from now, how enforceability come in. So already, like, our tax authorities, for example, now looking at basically, PRAL has been connected with NADRA. PRAL and NADRA's databases have been connected with the FBR, as well as banking data in real time, right? So they can see transactions, and now the AI layer is coming in, where that AI layer will automatically analyze. And it's a split second. I mean, it can analyze, right? That, okay, your assets didn't decrease on your declared assets or didn't increase, yet you had XYZ expenditures linked to your ID card or POS cards or credit cards. These are baseline examples today, right? So you can kind of see that mismatch and identify underreporting, right? So those mechanisms are examples of enforcement. Yeah, I mean, the Pakistan Crypto Council was one of them. We would have never thought that Pakistan would be in the forefront of adopting crypto. So I'll give you an example of what the change I feel. I think, first of all, the proverbial establishment of the boys, they understand technology in the future, right? And because of that, I think the government understands there's an urgency in bureaucrats also now to move towards that technology. And, departments like the State Bank and FBR and SECP, I mean, regulators are very quickly moving into the tech realm, right? And it's going to fundamentally change the way Pakistan is. That's why I'm bullish on Pakistan, because when I mentioned India in 2016, they took out the rupee, demonetized the rupee, and brought less in circulation when they changed the currency notes and forced digital adoption onto wallets and through smartphones, right? And then you saw them go to number 5. We're very similar in terms of both being former British colonies. So behavior patterns and regulation and government, even our tax code is like almost matches, right? We look at each other to write tax code. So I think that policies and framework is all there, and the will is there. It's just now the execution part. And bureaucrats tend to be slower, but this time I'm seeing that the will is very different. I think you're going to see a very different Pakistan in 5 years. We're living in probably some of the most turbulent, but also probably the best times for this part of the world. If you go back to look at McKinsey, they did. I had this in my first investment deck for the first fund, and then again the second fund. Sorry, I had this in my second fund deck. So, and they measured world GDP, the average in terms of where the growth was, right? In 180, it was right around where Pakistan is, a little bit above Afghanistan, Pakistan. That doesn't mean that this was the center, but it was basically the surrounding area, the China, India, and Central Asia, and all the wealth was accumulated in this part of the world, right? And it moved over massively, went all the way to Iceland because of the pull post-World War II, because of the pull of the US, right? It's the entire global average. And since 2010, it's been moving back. It was projected by 2030 to be back to right about where Pakistan is, right? So by default, people are going to come to this part of the world because all the growth is in Asia.